Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me. This is the account with the news summary for day 379 of the war in Ukraine. Today I have one article I want to point out, however I already mentioned the Ukrainian version the other day. Furthermore, we have two extra segments. The first will take a look at the Russian missile attack on Ukraine, and the second is about the provocation allegations voiced by Transnistria and the Ukrainian intelligence. All other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and international developments. And now, before we start the news, the flashpoints along the front. Crimea. Heavy fighting is reported in the settlement of Chervonopopivka and the surroundings. Bakhmut. The situation in Bakhmut seems to be stabilizing, however the situation looks better in the south compared to the north. There are conflicting reports of who currently has the upper hand. Russian sources report that Wagner units advanced despite desperate Ukrainian efforts to stop them, while Ukrainian sources report no major changes to the situation and recaptured positions. Prigozhin announced that Wagner captured Dubovo-Vasilivka, however other sources report Ukraine quietly pulled out of the settlement as it no longer served a purpose. Reports of fighting in the direction of Bodanivka and Khomove. And now for today's article I wanted to point out. I already pointed out the Ukrainian version of this article a few days ago, but it has now been released in English, so I just wanted to give a quick update on it. It is titled Kraken Attacks, the story of the Defense Intelligence Unit that the Russians have demonized. This is a very lengthy but highly interesting article about the Kraken Special Unit, from the early beginnings to its involvement in the liberation of Kharkiv Oblast. During an interview with the Kraken commander for this article, it was stated that the chief of the Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Kyrylo Budanov, actually participated in the special operation to liberate the village of Rusko-Lozova in Kharkiv Oblast at the end of April 2022. If you haven't checked the article out already, please do. And to start the news segment, a look at today's Russian missile attack on Ukraine. During the night, air raid sirens started sounding throughout Ukraine once again. Russia had launched its largest missile attack on Ukraine in months. 81 different missiles were fired overall and 39 hits were recorded. 34 out of 48 cruise missiles were shot down. Russia also launched a total of 6 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, against which Ukraine currently has no defense capabilities. In Kyiv, the air raid alert lasted for 7 hours as Russia launched its full arsenal of weapons against the Ukrainian capital. At least one Kinzhal hypersonic missile managed to penetrate the air defenses of Kyiv. These two articles have a quick summary of the events. Kyiv. A critical infrastructure facility was hit by a Kh-47 Kinzhal missile. Lviv. A missile fell on a residential building. There are civilian casualties. Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Hits were reported in Dnipro, Pavlograd, Kryvyi and Nikopol districts. There are civilian casualties. Odessa. Critical infrastructure, residential buildings and several power lines were damaged. Kharkiv Oblast. 15 strikes were recorded. One infrastructure facility and a residential building were hit. Kirovohrad Oblast. An energy facility was hit. Zhytomyr Oblast. Russia attacked with kamikaze drones. An infrastructure object was hit. Almost 150,000 residents were left without electricity. Dmytro Kuleba, Foreign Minister of Ukraine, called the latest attack barbaric as it has no military objective. The head of the Ukrainian President's office, Andriy Yermak, stated that Russia fails to understand that this terror will not break Ukrainians. President Zelensky stated that these missile attacks are all that Russia can do but it will not help them. He also held a meeting with law enforcers and government officials to discuss the aftermath of the attack and the response of the emergency services. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was completely cut off from the power grid because of the Russian missile attack. In the afternoon, it was reported that the power supply has been resumed. Andriy Yusov, a representative of the main Directorate of Intelligence, stated that Russia had prepared for a month for this missile attack as they cannot produce missiles in sufficient quantities. And now a quick look at today's provocation allegations by Transnistria and the Ukrainian intelligence. The so-called Ministry of State Security of the unrecognized breakaway territory of Transnistria has claimed to have prevented a terrorist attack against its officials, allegedly on orders from Ukraine's security service. The Ukrainian security service has called the statement a Kremlin provocation. Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the President's Office of Ukraine, also reacted to the claim, saying that Ukraine has no interest in Transnistria and this is a plan devised by Russia to justify an attack on Moldova. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry's main intelligence directorate reported that in the near future, Russia is planning a large-scale provocation on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. Russian propagandist Vladimir Zolovyov was instructed to cover it. It is suggested the plan involves the destruction of infrastructure facilities and victims among the civilian population. Several groups of Russians will arrive in Belarus to conduct the alleged provocation, which reportedly aims to form a negative public opinion about Ukraine among Belarusians and ensure Minsk's full participation in Russia's war against the country. According to available information, Moscow plans that Russian state-controlled media would be broadcasting live from the event site on March 11th. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. The People satellite helps spot thousands of units of Russian equipment. The ICEYE satellite, purchased with donations from Ukrainians, helped spot and destroy thousands of units of Russian military equipment. During the 5 months since the Ukrainian intelligence started using ICEYE, the officers of the main Directorate of Intelligence have conducted a space radar reconnaissance of almost 1,000 locations of Russian units in temporarily occupied and other territories that were of interest to the armed forces of Ukraine. During this time, the resource of the satellite allowed to detect 360 tents in the locations of the Russian army, as well as 7,321 units of enemy military and special equipment, in particular 45 aircrafts, 27 helicopters, 6 Iskander missile systems, 36 S-300 surface-to-air missile systems, 12 Pantsir S-1 air defense systems, 11 radar stations, and 10 ponton crossings. President Volodymyr Zelensky has appointed Major General Ole Sachon as Deputy Commander of the National Guard of Ukraine. According to Ukraine's presidential office head Andriy Yermak, it is quite realistic that Ukraine could receive international security guarantees at the next NATO summit this summer. There will definitely be security guarantees. We no longer hear no when we speak up about them. Now the question is, who will be the first to sign them with us? Yermak told reporters. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. The Mariupol mayor Vadim Boychenko has reported that the water reserves in the occupied city are dwindling and the water quality is terrible. He also reported that Russian occupation authorities have demolished 400 apartment blocks in order to hide war crimes. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Russia has currently 2 missile carriers on combat duty in the Black Sea with a total salvo of 4 cruise missiles. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has signed a law allowing the death penalty as punishment for treason. Belarus also signed an agreement with the occupation authorities in Crimea for cooperation. This is interesting as Belarus still recognizes Crimea as Ukrainian territory. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The head of the Polish president's office confirmed that the Polish president's statement the day before meant that Warsaw was ready to provide Kyiv with a certain number of Soviet MiG-29 fighter jets. Additionally, the Slovak defense minister has said that Poland has agreed to jointly provide MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine, and it is time for the Slovak government to make a decision on the issue. Furthermore, Poland has announced that Ukrainian soldiers completed their training on the Leopard 2 tanks, and Poland has delivered the remaining 10 tanks to Ukraine. Avril Haines, Director of National Intelligence of the US, stated that the American intelligence is inclined to believe that Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, is preparing for a prolonged war in Ukraine. The Pentagon is blocking the Biden administration from sharing evidence with the International Criminal Court in The Hague gathered by American intelligence agencies about Russian war crimes in Ukraine. American military leaders oppose helping the court investigate Russians because they fear setting a precedent that might help pave the way for it to prosecute Americans, the New York Times writes. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defense. On March 7, 2023, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko confirmed that one of Russia's small fleet of A-50U Mainstay D airborne early warning and control aircraft deployed in Belarus had been damaged. The aircraft was almost certainly attacked by a small uncrewed air system. The Mainstay has likely now been moved to a repair facility at Taganrog in Russia. The transit flight reportedly took place at a lower than usual altitude, likely because of damage to the pressurized cabin. The Mainstay was likely providing situational awareness for MiG-31K Foxhound D fighter aircraft modified to launch the AS-24 Killjoy air-launched ballistic missile, which Russia sees as a key strategic capability. The modification saw the jet's internal radar removed to balance the airframe, making pilots reliant on external sources of situational awareness, such as Mainstay. It is a realistic possibility that joint Russo-Belarusian air activity will now be forced to rely on ground control and fighter escort until another Mainstay can be deployed. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner PMC, announced that Russian troops had captured the eastern part of Bakhmut. This claim, the researchers say, is consistent with available visual evidence from the frontline city. Ukrainian forces most likely completed a control withdrawal from eastern Bakhmut across the Bakhmutka River. Therefore, the institute assesses that Russia currently controls roughly 50% of Bakhmut. The analysts now suggest that Russia will likely intensify attacks to the north of Vopytne and south of Yahidne in order to bypass the Bakhmutka River. However, it is still assessed that Russian forces are unlikely to be able to quickly exploit any breach beyond Bakhmut should they actually capture the city. The institute continues to assess that the Russian offensive in eastern Ukraine will soon reach its peak, even if the invaders capture Bakhmut, as the Russian military does not have enough power or reinforcements needed to capture Bakhmut entirely. The researchers also took a look at the following. US Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines stated on March 8th that Russian President Vladimir Putin likely recognizes the Russian military's current limited capability to sustain a short-term offensive and may pursue a protracted war. The Kremlin may be attempting to establish a new Russian government-controlled armed formation built as a volunteer unit through the Russian state-owned energy company Gazprom. A US official denied on March 8th that US intelligence assessed that a pro-Ukrainian group sabotaged the Nord Stream pipelines in September 2022. German and Polish officials announced that Germany and Poland will deliver 28 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine in March 2023, which will bolster Ukraine's capabilities to conduct a counteroffensive amidst high Russian tank losses. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. Today, the Russian Federation launched another massive missile attack on the critical infrastructure of our country and the homes of the civilian population. There is a hit, peaceful people died. The Russian aggressor does not give up his intentions regarding the occupation of Ukraine. Not having significant success on the battlefield, the enemy continues to use terror tactics, thereby grossly violating the norms of international humanitarian law. In total, during the day, the enemy launched 84 missiles of various bases. 34 missiles were destroyed by our defenders, 8 more did not reach their targets. Also, the enemy made 12 airstrikes, in particular used 8 unmanned aerial vehicles of the Shahed 136 type. Half of them were shot down. The enemy does not stop trying to surround the city of Bakhmut with further access to the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. The main efforts are concentrated on the conduct of offensive actions in the Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Shakhtarsk directions. The enemy is trying to break through the defenses of our troops in the Kupiansk and Liman directions. In the direction of Bakhmut, the enemy does not stop the assault on the city of Bakhmut. Our defenders repelled numerous attacks in the Bakhmut and Ivanivske districts. In the Avdiivka and Shakhtarsk directions, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the direction of Krasnohorivka, Kamyanka, Avdiivka, Severne, Pervomaiske, Nevelske, Marinka, Pobjeda, and Vuhledar settlements of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Zaporizhia and Kherson directions, the enemy is conducting defensive operations. In some localities of the temporarily occupied Kherson Oblast, looting by the Russian invaders has intensified. The occupiers are taking away the looted property, household appliances from Hola Pristan and Novosburivka in trucks used to deliver ammunition to their units. And that concludes today's news report. As usual, you can find links to all the articles I mentioned in the description in case you want to read up on the details. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. I hope you will join me again tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.